It was just past midnight when someone knocked on his door, soft at first, then desperate. When he opened it, a little girl stood there, barefoot, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Please," she whispered, clutching her doll. "They've beaten my mama. She's dying." For a moment, the man froze. He wasn't a cop or a doctor. He was a former prisoner, a man the world had already written off. But when he saw the terror in her eyes, something inside him shifted. Without a word, he grabbed his jacket and followed her into the darkness. What happened next shocked everyone who thought he'd never change, and proved that sometimes redemption comes when you least expect it. Stay with me until the end, because this story will remind you that even the most broken souls can save lives. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Marcus Thompson had been out of prison for exactly 8 months and 12 days. Not that he was counting, but when you spend 7 years behind bars, every day of freedom feels like borrowed time. He lived alone in a cramped apartment on the wrong side of Riverside, where sirens wailed through the night and neighbors minded their own business. That's exactly how Marcus liked it. The less attention, the better. At 42 years old, Marcus carried the weight of his past like a scar that never quite healed. His hands, weathered and strong from years of prison labor, now spent their days stocking shelves at a discount grocery store. The manager, Mrs. Chen, had taken a chance on him when no one else would. She never asked about his record, never made him feel less than human. For that, Marcus was grateful, even if the pay barely covered rent and ramen noodles. The neighborhood kids called him Ghost Man because he moved through the streets like a shadow, head down, never making eye contact. He'd perfected the art of being invisible. In prison, invisibility meant survival. On the outside, it meant peace. Marcus had learned the hard way that the world wasn't ready to forgive men like him, so he stopped asking for forgiveness altogether. His apartment was sparse. A mattress on the floor, a folding table, 2 plastic chairs, and an old television that only picked up 3 channels. The walls were bare except for a single photograph tucked behind the bathroom mirror. A picture of his daughter, Sophia, taken when she was 7 years old. She'd be 15 now, living with her mother in another state, believing her father was dead. It was better that way, Marcus told himself. Some sins don't wash clean, no matter how much time passes. That Tuesday night had started his shift at 9 like any other. Marcus walked the 6 blocks home through streets that smelled of exhaust and broken dreams, heated up a can of soup, and settled in front of the television. The late news was playing, but he wasn't really watching. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in that familiar cycle of regret and self-loathing that visited him every night like an unwelcome guest. The first knock was so soft, he almost missed it. Marcus muted the television, listening. Silence. Then it came again. 3 quick taps, hesitant but urgent. His stomach tightened. Nobody visited Marcus Thompson. Nobody even knew Marcus Thompson existed. He approached the door cautiously, pressing his ear against the wood. Prison had taught him to be careful, to think twice before opening any door. Through the thin walls, he could hear muffled sobbing. A child's voice, barely audible, whispering something he couldn't make out. When Marcus finally opened the door, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old, standing in the hallway like a broken doll. Her pink pajamas were torn and stained with something dark. Blood, Marcus realized with a sick feeling in his stomach. Her bare feet were dirty and cut, and she clutched a raggedy stuffed elephant against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They held a terror so pure, so absolute, that it cut through every wall he'd built around his heart. In those eyes, he saw his own daughter, the way she'd looked at him the last time he'd seen her, before the arrest, before everything fell apart. "They've beaten my mama," the little girl whispered again, her voice cracking. "She's dying." Marcus knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see a bruise forming on her left cheek, finger-shaped marks on her thin arms. Rage flooded through him, hot and immediate. He'd seen enough violence in his life to recognize the signs of someone who'd been hurt by people who were supposed to protect them. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Emma," she whispered, clutching her elephant tighter. "Emma Rodriguez, my mama. She won't wake up. There's so much blood." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. Here was this tiny girl, barely old enough for school, carrying trauma that would scar her forever. And she'd chosen his door, his apartment, his second chance at being human. "Where do you live, Emma?" he asked, already reaching for his jacket. "Up all the ceiling stairs," she said, pointing toward. "Apartment 12, but I'm scared to go back. What if they're still there?" Marcus's jaw clenched. He'd heard the fights before, the shouting and crashing that came from the apartment above his. Like most people in the building, he'd chosen to ignore it. Mind your own business, keep your head down, don't get involved. That was the code of the streets, the unwritten rule that kept people alive, but left others to suffer in silence. But looking at Emma now, Marcus realized that some rules were made to be broken. "Who hurt your mama?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Uncle Ray," Emma whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. "He was drinking again, and he got really mad when Mama said he couldn't live with us anymore. He hit her so hard she fell down and didn't get up." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back memories of his own childhood mothered, his bruises, his own helplessness in the face of violence. He'd sworn he'd never let anyone hurt the people he cared about again. That promise had led him down a dark path, had cost him 7 years of his life and his relationship with his daughter. But maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to keep that promise the right way. "Emma," he said, looking directly into her frightened eyes, "I'm going to help you and your mama, but I need you to stay right here while I go check on her, okay?" The little girl shook her head frantically. "No, don't leave me. What if Uncle Ray comes back?" Marcus glanced down the hallway, then made a decision that would change everything. "Then you come with me," he said, standing up and extending his hand. "But we're going to be very quiet, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do." Emma's small hand slipped into Marcus's, her fingers cold and trembling. Together, they moved through the dimly lit hallway toward the staircase. Each step creaked under their weight, the sound echoing off the peeling wallpaper like gunshots in the silence. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear of what they might find, but from the weight of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. As they climbed the narrow stairs, Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. He should call the police. Let the professionals handle this. But Emma's uncle could be long gone by now, and every second they wasted could mean the difference between life and death for her mother. Besides, Marcus knew how these things went. The cops would ask questions, run background checks, and discover his record. They'd see a convicted felon at a crime scene and draw their own conclusions. No, he decided. This was something he had to handle himself. The hallway on the second floor reeked of cigarettes and desperation. Apartment 12 sat at the far end, its door slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Marcus could hear the faint sound of a television playing somewhere inside, a laugh track from some late-night comedy show that felt obscene given the circumstances. "Wait here," Marcus whispered to Emma, positioning her behind him near the wall. "If anything happens, if you hear shouting or anything scary, you run downstairs and hide in my apartment, okay?" Emma nodded, clutching her elephant so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Marcus approached the door with the careful steps of a man who'd learned to navigate dangerous situations. Prison had taught him to read rooms, to sense violence before it erupted, to move with purpose but without haste. He pressed his ear to the doorframe, listening for any sound of movement inside. Nothing but the television and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. He pushed the door open slowly, wincing as the hinges groaned in protest. The apartment was a mirror image of his own, but where his was sparse and clean, this one told the story of lives falling apart. Empty beer bottles littered the coffee table, ashtrays overflowed onto stained carpet, and the air hung thick with the smell of alcohol and fear. But it was the sight in the living room that made Marcus's blood run cold. Maria Rodriguez lay crumpled beside the couch, her dark hair matted with blood that had pooled beneath her head. Her face was swollen and bruised, one eye completely shut, her lips split and bleeding. She wore a waitress uniform from some diner, the name tag reading Maria in cheerful letters that seemed to mock the violence that had been done to her. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. For a terrifying moment, he felt nothing. Then, weak but steady, he found it. She was alive, but barely. "Maria," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. "Maria, can you hear me?" Her good eye fluttered open, unfocused and filled with pain. When she saw Marcus hovering over her, panic flashed across her face. She tried to pull away, her body tensing despite her injuries. "No, no," Marcus said quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. Emma came to get me. Your little girl, she's safe." At the mention of her daughter's name, Maria's expression changed. She tried to speak but only managed a weak whisper. "Emma, where?" "She's right outside," Marcus assured her. "She's okay, but we need to get you to a hospital." Maria shook her head weakly. "No, no hospitals. Can't afford insurance." Marcus had heard this story before. Working people caught between survival and bankruptcy, choosing to suffer rather than face medical bills that would destroy them financially. But looking at Maria's injuries, he knew she didn't have a choice. "You could have a concussion, internal bleeding," he said gently. "This isn't something you can sleep off." "Ray," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "My brother-in-law. He was drinking. Said I owed him money for letting him stay here. When I told him to leave, she didn't need to finish." Marcus could see the rest of the story written in the bruises on her face, the blood on the carpet, the terror in her daughter's eyes. "Where is he now?" Marcus asked. "Gone," Maria managed. "But he'll come back. He always comes back when he needs money or a place to crash." Marcus felt that familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had landed him in prison 7 years ago. Back then, he'd let that anger control him, had made choices that destroyed his own life in pursuit of what he thought was justice. But this was different. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. This was about protecting a woman and child who had no one else. "Can you sit up?" he asked Maria. With his help, she managed to prop herself against the couch, wincing with every movement. Marcus could see she was trying to pull strong, trying herself together for her daughter's sake. It reminded him of his own mother, who'd worn makeup to hide bruises and smiled through split lips, always pretending everything was fine. "Emma," Marcus called softly toward the door. "Your mama's awake." The little girl appeared in the doorway like a ghost, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. When she saw her mother sitting up, relief flooded her face, but it was mixed with a sadness no child should ever have to carry. "Mama," Emma whispered, running to Maria's side. "I was so scared." Maria wrapped her arms around her daughter, tears streaming down her battered face. "I'm okay, baby. Mama's okay." But Marcus could see she wasn't okay. None of them were okay. This apartment, this building, this whole neighborhood was full of people who were just surviving, just getting by, just hoping to make it through another day without the world crushing them completely. As he watched Emma comfort her injured mother, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He wasn't going to walk away. He wasn't going to pretend he hadn't seen this, wasn't going to go back to his apartment and his canned soup and his careful invisibility. "Maria," he said quietly, "you and Emma can't stay here tonight. Not if he might come back." Maria looked up at him with confusion and wariness. "I don't... Who are you? Why are you helping us?" It was a fair question. Marcus realized he hadn't even told her his name, had just appeared in her apartment like some guardian angel she had no reason to trust. How could he explain that her daughter's knock on his door had awakened something in him he thought was dead? How could he tell her that looking at Emma reminded him of the father he'd failed to be, the man he'd lost somewhere between anger and imprisonment? "My name is Marcus Thompson," he said simply. "I live downstairs, and I'm helping because—" He paused, looking at Emma's small hand, holding her mother's larger one, "because sometimes we get a second chance to do the right thing." Maria studied Marcus's face in the dim light filtering through her apartment window. Something about his eyes, the way they carried weight but not malice, made her want to trust him. But trust was a luxury she'd learned to live without. "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, her voice thick with pain and exhaustion. "My family, they don't talk to me anymore. Not since I married Ray's brother. Not since I had Emma." Marcus knelt down again, his voice steady. "You can stay in. I'll sleep my apartment tonight on the floor. Tomorrow we figure out something more permanent." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Marcus interrupted gently. "I'm offering." Emma looked between the two adults, her young mind trying to process the kindness of a stranger when family had brought only violence. She'd learned early that grown-ups made promises they didn't keep, that safety was temporary, that pain was permanent. But something about this man felt different. "Can I bring Mr. Peanuts?" Emma asked, holding up her stuffed elephant. Marcus's expression softened. "Of course you can." As he helped Maria to her feet, supporting her weight against his shoulder, Marcus felt the familiar ache of purpose. It was the same feeling he'd had years ago when he'd first held his daughter Sophia, that overwhelming need to protect something precious and fragile. He'd lost that feeling somewhere in the darkness of his mistakes, but here it was again, sharp and undeniable. The journey downstairs took forever. Maria moved slowly, each step sending waves of pain through her battered body. Marcus matched her pace, whispering encouragement, while Emma clutched Mr. Peanuts and stayed close to her mother's side. Inside Marcus's sparse apartment, the difference was immediate. Where Maria's home felt chaotic and dangerous, this space held a quiet peace. Emma's eyes widened as she took in the orderly simplicity, the way everything had its place. "It's not much," Marcus said, helping Maria settle onto the couch. "But it's safe." He disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel. "For the swelling," he explained, gently pressing it against Maria's bruised cheek. Maria flinched at first, then relaxed into the cool relief. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "You don't even know us." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma explore the small living room with the careful curiosity of a child who'd learned that new places could hold hidden dangers. When she found the photograph behind the bathroom mirror that had fallen to the floor during their absence, she picked it up with careful hands. "Who's this?" Emma asked, showing Marcus the picture of Sophia. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "That's my daughter." "Where is she?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus took the photograph from Emma's small hands, studying the face he hadn't seen in person for over 7 years. "She lives far away," he said finally, "with her mother." Emma nodded with the acceptance of a child who understood that families came in broken pieces. "Do you miss her?" "Every day." Maria watched this exchange with growing understanding. She recognized the pain in Marcus's voice, the same hollow ache that came from loving someone you couldn't protect, couldn't reach, couldn't hold. "What happened?" Maria asked softly. Marcus set the photograph on the folding table, his fingers tracing the edges. "I made choices that hurt people, good people, my wife, my daughter. I thought I was protecting them, but I was just destroying everything I loved." He sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs, the weight of his past pressing down on his shoulders. "Sophia was 5 when I went to prison. Her mother told her I died. It was easier than explaining why Daddy couldn't come home." Emma climbed onto the couch next to her mother, sensing the sadness in the room. "Prison is where bad people go," she said matter-of-factly. "That's right," Marcus nodded. "And I was a bad person for a while. But you helped us." Emma pointed out with the simple logic of childhood. Bad people don't help. Marcus looked at this little girl who'd knocked on his door and changed everything. Maybe people can change, he said quietly. As the night wore on, Marcus made coffee and heated soup while Maria dozed fitfully on the couch. Emma sat beside her mother, humming softly to Mr. Peanuts, her voice a thread of innocence in the darkness they'd all survived. Around 3 a.m, Maria woke with a start, her body jerking as if she'd been falling. For a moment, panic flashed across her face as she forgot where she was. Then she saw Marcus sitting in his chair, still awake, watching over them like a guardian. "You should sleep," she whispered. "I'm fine," Marcus replied. "Old habits from prison. Light sleeper?" Maria studied his profile in the soft glow of the television. "What did you do to end up there?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Maria thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I killed a man." The words settled between them like stones dropped in still water. Emma stirred but didn't wake, and Maria felt her breath catch in her throat. "He was hurting my family," Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "My mother had been for years. My father died when I was 12 and she started dating this man, Eddie. At first he seemed nice enough, brought flowers, took us out to dinner. But once he moved in," Marcus's hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. "The hitting started small, a slap when dinner was late, a shove when she questioned where he'd been. Then it got worse, much worse." Maria touched the bruise on her own cheek, understanding flooding through her. "I was 18, working construction, trying to save money for community college. One night I came home early and found him beating her with a belt. She was curled up on the kitchen floor, bleeding, begging him to stop, and something inside me just broke." Marcus looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully beside her mother. This child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd seen too much violence for her young eyes. "I didn't mean to kill him," Marcus said. "I just wanted him to stop. But when I pulled him off her, he came at me with a kitchen knife. We fought, and he fell, hit his head on the corner of the counter." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Emma's gentle breathing. The prosecutor said it was manslaughter, not murder, because it was self-defense. But Eddie had connections, friends in the system. They painted me as a violent young man with anger issues. 7 years they gave me. 7 years. Maria reached out slowly, her fingertips barely touching Marcus's arm. "Your mother? She blamed me," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "Said I'd destroyed our family, that Eddie wasn't that bad, that she could have handled it. She testified against me at the bin trouble, said I'd always trial. D always had a temper." The betrayal in his voice was raw, even after all these years. Maria understood that pain too. The way the people who should protect you sometimes became the ones who hurt you most. "My wife left while I was awaiting trial, took Sophia and moved across the country. Can't say I blame her. What kind of future could I offer them?" Emma stirred and opened her eyes, looking around with the momentary confusion of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. When she saw Marcus and her mother talking quietly, she smiled sleepily. "Are you telling stories?" she asked. "Something like that," Maria said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I like stories," Emma said. "Mama tells me stories about princesses who are brave and dragons who are really just scared." Marcus looked at this child, who found hope in fairy tales, who still believed in happy endings despite everything she'd witnessed. "What's your favorite story?" he asked. Emma thought for a moment, her face serious with the weight of the question. "The one about the beast who becomes good because someone shows him love." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a 6-year-old girl, speaking truth that adults spent lifetimes trying to understand. That sometimes, the most broken things could be healed by the simple act of being seen, being valued, being loved. As dawn began to creep through the thin curtains, painting the apartment in shades of gray and gold, Marcus felt something shift inside him. For 7 years in 8 prison and months on the outside, he'd carried his guilt like armor, protecting himself from hope, from connection, from the possibility of redemption. But looking at Maria and Emma, these two souls who'd trusted him with their safety, their vulnerability, their stories, Marcus realized that maybe his mother had been wrong. Maybe he hadn't destroyed his family. Maybe he'd just been waiting for the right family to find. The morning light revealed the full extent of Maria's injuries, and Marcus knew they couldn't put off medical attention any longer. But first, they had a more immediate problem to solve. "Ray will come back," Maria said, as if reading his thoughts. "He always does, and when he finds out we're gone..." Marcus stood up, his jaw set with determination. "Then we make sure he understands that's not going to happen." For the first time since opening his door to Emma's desperate knock, Marcus Thompson felt the stirring of something he'd thought was dead forever. Not the rage that had consumed him years ago, but something cleaner, stronger. Purpose. The chance to protect instead of destroy, to build instead of tear down. The beast in the fairy tale had found his beauty. Now it was time to prove that monsters could indeed become men. The morning brought new challenges that Marcus hadn't anticipated. As sunlight filtered through his apartment windows, the reality of their situation became crystal clear. Maria needed medical attention, Emma needed stability, and somewhere out there, Ray was likely nursing his own wounds and planning his return. Marcus had been awake all night, his mind racing through possibilities. He'd learned in prison that survival meant thinking 3 moves ahead, anticipating problems before they became crises. The old Marcus would have handled this with his fists, would have tracked down Ray and settled things the way the streets taught him. But that Marcus had cost him everything he'd ever loved. This Marcus had to be smarter. By 7 in the morning, he'd made his decision. He called Mrs. Chen at the grocery store, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. "I need to take a personal day," he said. "Family emergency." Mrs. Chen didn't ask questions. She never did. That was part of what made her different from most people Marcus had encountered since his release. "Take care of yourself, Marcus," she said simply. "We'll manage here." Emma was awake by then, sitting cross-legged on the floor, having a serious conversation with Mr. Peanuts about whether they were safe now. Her resilience amazed Marcus. Children, he'd learned, had an incredible capacity to adapt, to find normalcy in chaos. It was adults who struggled with change, who carried their scars like badges of honor. "Are we going to live here now?" Emma asked, looking up at Marcus with those wide, trusting eyes. Marcus knelt down beside her, choosing his words carefully. "For today, yes. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." It was honest, without being overwhelming. Emma nodded gravely, as if she understood that life was made up of one day at a time, that planning too far ahead was a luxury they couldn't afford. Maria stirred on the couch, wincing as consciousness brought back the pain of her injuries. In the harsh morning light, the bruises looked even worse, painting her face in shades of purple and yellow that made Marcus's stomach clench with anger. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "Like I got hit by a truck," Maria managed, attempting a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." Marcus helped her sit up, noticing how she moved carefully, protecting what might be bruised ribs. "We need to get you checked out," he said. "There's a free clinic about 10 blocks from here. They don't ask too many questions." Maria's expression tightened with familiar worry. "I can't afford." "It's free," Marcus interrupted gently. "Really free. Run by a church group. I know because..." He paused, remembering. "Because my mother used to volunteer there before everything happened." The mention of his mother brought back memories Marcus usually kept locked away. She'd spent countless hours at that clinic, treating people who fell through the cracks of the system. People like them. It was one of the few good things he remembered about her, one of the reasons her betrayal had cut so deep. As they prepared to leave, Emma clutched Mr. Peanuts tighter. "What if Uncle Ray comes while we're gone?" she asked. Marcus looked down at this little girl who'd learned to fear the return of violence, who'd been forced to calculate safety in a world that offered so little of it. "He won't," Marcus said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. but just in case, we're going to ask someone to keep an eye on things." Mrs. Patterson from apartment 4 had been watching Marcus with curious eyes ever since he'd moved in. She was elderly, widowed, and spent most of her day sitting by her window, observing the comings and goings of the building. Marcus had always avoided her attempts at conversation, but now he realized she might be exactly what they needed. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, knocking gently on her door. "I wonder if I could ask you a favor." The old woman opened her door with surprise evident on her weathered face. In 8 months, Marcus had never initiated a conversation with anyone in the building. "Marcus, what can I do for you? My friends and I need to step out for a few hours," he said, gesturing toward Maria and Emma waiting in the hallway. "I was wondering if you might keep an eye on my apartment. Make sure nobody goes in who shouldn't be there." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes took in Maria's bruised face, Emma's torn pajamas, the protective way Marcus positioned himself between them and the world. She'd lived long enough to recognize the signs of trouble, and longer still to know when not to ask too many questions. "Of course, dear," she said. "You take all the time you need." The walk to the clinic took longer than expected. Maria moved slowly, each step sending waves of pain through her body, while Emma walked between the two adults, her small hand alternating between her mother's and Marcus's. They drew stares from passers-by, this unlikely trio making their way through streets that had seen too much hardship to be surprised by one more family in crisis. Marcus Thompson's story reminds us that redemption isn't found in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of choosing love over fear. When Emma knocked on his door that night, she didn't just ask for help. She offered him the chance to become the man he'd always wanted to be. Sometimes the most broken among us carry the greatest capacity for healing others. What broken door in your life might lead to someone's salvation? Drop your thoughts below, and remember, your past doesn't define your future.